At just 23 years old, Katarzyna Zowada walked out of her university class and was never seen again. Weeks later, fragments of her body were pulled from a river, exposing a crime so calculated it would haunt Poland for decades. Katarzyna Zowada was born on June 1, 1975, and grew up in Poland, later becoming a student at Jagiellonian University in Krakow. At the time of her death, she was 23 years old. Katarzyna was described as kind, gentle, and introverted, a young woman who kept largely to herself. She maintained a small circle of friends and was not widely known among her classmates, many of whom struggled to recall specific details about her personality or daily routines. One detail that stood out was her unexpected interest in the band Grateful Dead, a preference that contrasted with her otherwise quiet demeanor. Her academic path reflected a period of uncertainty and personal searching. Katarzyna initially enrolled in psychology, leaving the program after one semester. She then briefly pursued history before ultimately settling on religious studies. These changes suggested an ongoing effort to find direction rather than academic failure. Throughout this time, she continued her studies without drawing attention to herself and remained largely private. A major turning point in Katarzyna's life occurred in 1996 with the death of her father. The loss had a profound emotional impact on her and marked the beginning of significant mental health struggles. She later sought treatment for depression and attended a psychiatric clinic in Nowa Huta. This history became an important factor in how authorities initially understood her disappearance. Katarzyna's life before November 1998 was defined by quiet ambition, personal grief, and an inward-facing nature, forming the context through which her sudden disappearance. On November 12, 1998, Katarzyna Zowada left her university classes in Krakow with plans to meet her mother later that evening. She was expected at a medical clinic in Nowa Huta at 6 o'clock, where she had previously received treatment. Katarzyna never arrived. When the meeting time passed without contact, concern quickly set in. Her absence was unusual, and by that evening her mother reported her missing to the Kyiv police. At the time she disappeared, Katarzyna had last been seen wearing a corduroy coat and black jeans. There was no indication that she planned to travel or to be away overnight. Friends and classmates could offer little additional information, as she tended to keep her routines private and maintained a limited social circle. Investigators initially approached the case as a standard missing person inquiry involving a young adult. As the hours turned into days with no confirmed sightings, her mother, Bogusława Zowada, sought additional help beyond official channels. A private investigator was hired in an effort to locate Katarzyna and reconstruct her last known movements. Early searches and inquiries failed to provide answers. There were no confirmed witnesses who had seen her after she left campus, and no clear explanation for her disappearance emerged. Given Katarzyna's documented struggles with depression, authorities considered several possibilities during the early phase of the investigation. At this stage, there was no evidence of violence, and nothing to suggest that a crime had occurred. The case remained unresolved, suspended in uncertainty, as investigators continued. On January 6, 1999, nearly 2 months after Katarzyna Zowada vanished, a tugboat traveling along the Vistula River near the Davy barrage experienced an unexpected slowdown. As the crew inspected the vessel's propeller to determine the cause, they made a disturbing discovery. A piece of human skin was tangled around the blades. The crew immediately alerted authorities, and police were notified the following day. Further searches of the Vistula River were carried out soon after the initial discovery. Additional human remains were recovered, including part of a leg. This development marked a decisive shift in the investigation, confirming that Katarzyna Zowada's disappearance was no longer a missing person case, but a homicide. DNA analysis, one of the earliest uses of such testing in Poland, confirmed that the recovered skin belonged to Katarzyna. No images from the recovery site were released publicly, placing full investigative weight on the physical evidence itself. Forensic examination revealed that the body had been dismembered and decapitated. Pathologists noted that the skin fragment showed no signs of random damage caused by river activity or boat traffic. On January 14, 1999, Katarzyna's right leg was officially recovered from the river, reinforcing the conclusion that her body had been deliberately separated. The condition of the remains immediately raised questions about how and where the crime had taken place, transforming the case into one of Poland's most disturbing homicide investigations. Initially, investigators considered explanations that did not involve murder. Because Katarzyna had a history of depression, some suggested she may have taken her own life by entering the river. Another theory proposed accidental drowning, followed by post-mortem damage caused by passing barges. These possibilities were gradually dismissed as forensic analysis progressed. Experts determined that the skin had been deliberately removed using precise cutting techniques, indicating the use of sharp instruments such as a scalpel and suggesting experience with anatomical dissection or carcass handling. Plant material and organic fibers recovered alongside the remains further weakened theories of accidental damage. Investigators began to suspect that the skin removal was intentional and possibly intended for use as a garment. Polish authorities sought specialized expertise, consulting a United Nations specialist in torture analysis. A Portuguese forensic expert reviewed injuries found on the recovered leg and concluded they were consistent with blows delivered by someone trained in martial arts. Polish medical professionals specializing in sports-related trauma later supported this assessment. These findings led investigators to formally abandon suicide and accident theories, concluding that Katarzyna had been deliberately killed in an act driven by extreme violence and psychosexual motives. In early 1999, investigators examined individuals who may have encountered Katarzyna before her disappearance. Attention focused briefly on a man known for wandering along the Vistula River who had assaulted women and expressed hostility toward them. Despite initial suspicion, no evidence linked him to Katarzyna's disappearance or remains, and he was ruled out. By July 2000, forensic teams identified biological material that did not belong to Katarzyna, but comparisons with multiple suspects produced no matches. With no witnesses, confirmed crime scene, or recovered weapons, investigative momentum declined. In 2001, the prosecutor's office suspended active proceedings due to a lack of new evidence. The case was transferred to a specialized homicide unit, informally known as the X-Files, reflecting both the unusual nature of the crime and hopes that future review might uncover new leads. The investigation then entered a prolonged period of stagnation. During this time, investigators reviewed other violent cases. In the village of Brzezina near Krakow, a Russian student named Vladimir W. murdered his father, removed the skin from his head, and fashioned it into a mask. Vladimir was enrolled at Jagiellonian University, prompting police to consider a possible connection. A search of his home on May 31, 1999 produced no evidence linking him to Katarzyna Zowada. He was later deported to Russia, where he remained imprisoned for his father's murder, and authorities concluded the cases were unrelated. In 2005, a headless corpse discovered in Yerzowski Park raised further questions. Investigators initially explored whether the same perpetrator could be responsible, but in 2011, the individual responsible for that homicide was identified and prosecuted, allowing the cases to be formally separated. None of these comparisons advanced Katarzyna's investigation. Advances in forensic science led authorities to reopen the case in early 2012. Prosecutors ordered a second exhumation of Katarzyna's remains for a more detailed autopsy. Botanical experts analyzed plant material and organic fibers and determined they did not originate from an aquatic environment and were found only in limited geographic areas. This challenged earlier assumptions, suggesting the murder did not occur near the river and that the Vistula was used solely to dispose of the remains. While investigators adjusted their theories accordingly, no definitive location of the killing was identified. In 2016, prosecutors ordered another extensive search of the Vistula River in an effort to recover any remaining parts of Katarzyna's body. Advanced technology was employed, including high-frequency sonar, underwater cameras, and detailed GPS mapping. Expert divers from the Polish Special Divers Group, trained in locating bodies in complex aquatic conditions, carefully examined the riverbed. Despite the scale and precision of the operation, no new evidence connected to Katarzyna's case was found. The renewed efforts clarified certain aspects of the crime, but did not resolve the mystery surrounding her death. Suspicion eventually centered on Robert Janciuski, a man whose background appeared to align with several elements identified by investigators. Born in 1965 and living in Krakow, Janciuski had been connected to Jagiellonian University through his work. He had previously been employed in a human dissection laboratory and later at the Institute of Zoology, where animal skins were prepared. His employment there ended after he killed rabbits kept at the institute, an incident that drew attention to his behavior and psychological state. Janciuski had training in martial arts and bodybuilding, a detail that investigators considered significant given forensic conclusions that the assailant possessed combat training. He had also completed alternative military service at a monastic hospital, where he occasionally assisted in the mortuary. Psychological assessments later described him as sadistic and noted a pattern of harassing women. Police also suspected that he had stalked and intimidated a female neighbor and that he had visited the grave of another murdered girl. These factors contributed to growing scrutiny. In 1999, Janciuski was considered a person of interest, but at that time no arrest was made. Years later, in 2017, the case took a dramatic turn. Investigators received information from a former acquaintance of Janciuski, though the contents of that communication were not made public. During a search of his apartment in the Kazimierz district, traces of blood were found in his bathroom. Shortly afterward, Janciuski was taken into custody and formally charged with aggravated murder with particular cruelty. The legal proceedings extended over several years. In 2022, a trial court found Janciuski guilty based on the evidence presented and sentenced him to life imprisonment. The verdict was seen as a resolution to a case that had remained open for decades. However, the proceedings did not end there. Janciuski appealed the conviction, and the case moved to the appellate level. In 2024, the Court of Appeal overturned the guilty verdict. The judges ruled that the evidence presented at trial was insufficient to meet the required standard of proof. Applying the principle of indubio pro reo, which mandates that unresolved doubt must benefit the accused, the court acquitted Robert Janciuski. He was released from custody, and the ruling left the case without a convicted perpetrator. The decision underscored the limitations of the evidence and reopened questions that had once seemed settled. The murder of Katarzyna Zowada quickly became one of the most infamous and unsettling criminal cases in modern Polish history. The extreme violence involved, combined with the calculated manner in which her body was treated, drew intense public attention and sustained media coverage. The forensic findings, particularly the deliberate removal of skin, led to widespread shock and discomfort, both within Poland and beyond its borders. Media outlets frequently compared the unknown perpetrator to characters from popular culture, most notably drawing parallels to the film The Silence of the Lambs. The assailant was often referred to as Poland's own Hannibal Lecter, a label that reflected the horror associated with the crime rather than any confirmed identity. These comparisons amplified public fascination, but did little to bring clarity or resolution to the investigation. Despite repeated efforts by law enforcement, the case resisted closure. Over the years, investigators employed advancing forensic techniques, re-examined physical evidence, explored multiple suspects, and revisited earlier assumptions. Each phase of renewed inquiry produced fragments of understanding, but failed to establish a definitive sequence of events or identify the person responsible beyond reasonable doubt. Even the prosecution and eventual acquittal of Robert Janciuski did not bring final answers. Today, Katarzyna Zowada's murder remains officially unsolved. The absence of a confirmed perpetrator continues to cast a shadow over the case, leaving lingering uncertainty for investigators, the public, and her family. Her death stands as a reminder of the limitations of criminal investigation when evidence is scarce and time erodes clarity. Decades later, The case endures as a chilling example of unresolved violence and unanswered questions within the Polish justice system.